Our sermon text for this morning is Acts chapter 5, verses 12 and verses 17 to 32. Brothers and sisters in Christ, fellow redeemed in our risen Lord. What makes people act the way that they do? This is a question that people have been thinking about throughout the years, isn't it? Some people would like to say that it's all predetermined by fate. That everything is kind of decided and you just kind of go along for the ride. Some people say that we are completely controlled by the chemicals in our brains. It's all biological and genetic. Others say that it's all has to do with the environment that you were raised in, how you were brought up. That controls your actions. Here in our text for today, we see some people, the apostles, acting kind of strangely, acting in ways that we wouldn't normally expect. We're told that they met at Solomon's colonnade, which is really just an area outside of the temple, a very public area, and there they preached about Jesus, a message that they had been told not to preach about by the government. Seems kind of like a strange thing for them to do. For them, it wasn't a chemical imbalance in their brains that made them do this. It was a simple fact that they had witnessed something very powerful. They had witnessed the resurrection. We too are witnesses of that resurrection. And it gives us the same power that it gave them. First of all, it gives us the power to recognize that first, we must obey God rather than men. But it also gives us the confidence to know that God is with us. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but our first lesson that we read, for the three lessons that we read every Sunday, the first lesson is usually from the Old Testament. But during the Easter season, it's been a tradition in the church that the first lesson would be a reading from Acts instead of the Old Testament. And that continues on until Pentecost. This book of Acts is really an interesting book, filled with examples of apostles doing things that we might consider to be kind of strange, kind of crazy. They go out and they boldly proclaim the message of Christ. And here in our text we see them performing miracles, right? They were healing people. And they were confronted by the Sanhedrin, the government of the Jewish people at that time. They were arrested, we hear. And of course, in the middle of the night, an angel comes and releases these people. And what do? I think perhaps the most interesting part of this story is what they do after they've been released. They go back to the same place that they had just been arrested from. And it says very early in the morning. They didn't waste time. They go back to that same place and they do the same thing that they had just got arrested for. Now, I think we were in that position. I don't know, maybe we would change our names, change our identities, and move as far away from Jerusalem as possible. They did the exact opposite. And I think a lot of people would look at that and think, well, that's crazy. Only crazy people would do this. They weren't crazy. They had seen God. They had seen the resurrection. And they understood one important concept, that it was more important for them to obey God than to obey man. That's what they say here in our text. Now that verse, it means a lot to us as well. It's more important for us to obey God than it is to obey man. You know where that verse comes up a lot in the catechism? Maybe you had catechism as an adult, or maybe it was a long time ago when you were 13 or 14 years old. That verse comes up in catechism class when you're studying the fourth commandment, the one about honoring your parents. And as you study that commandment, you see that it's more than just honoring your parents, it's also about honoring all authority. And usually in the catechism, you go through and you see how it's not really a choice for us whether we want to obey the government or not. God tells us to obey the government. It's not our choice whether we want to pay our taxes this week, right? We have to pay our taxes. God commands us. Children, it's the same. They don't have a choice whether they want to obey their parents. God commands them. But then, at the end of the catechism lesson, there's always this verse kind of thrown in as an exception to the rule. We must obey God rather than man. And thankfully, I think most of us don't have parents that put us into this situation where we have to choose between obeying them or obeying God. Thankfully, our government doesn't put us into that situation too often either. But here, we see in our text that really this is about our calling as Christians. See, I don't know about you, but I wear a few different hats. I think all of us probably wear a few different hats. We might be children, so we might wear a son or a daughter hat. We might be parents ourselves, so we might wear the father or mother hat. Might be spouses, or the hat of a husband or a wife. Employer or employee, or we might wear the hat of just being a friend. God has called us into a lot of different situations, but the hat that sort of trumps all of those callings that we have been placed into in this life is the hat that says Christian, right? So we are Christian brothers and sisters. We are Christian parents, Christian daughters and sons, Christian husbands and wives. And here in our text, we see that it is better to serve God rather than to serve man. May God forgive us for those times when we have gone to serve the needs of our fellow man instead of God's, and when they're in opposition to God's will. But we can also thank God at the same time for those opportunities when we can do both.